And welcome to Technology Tap. I'm Professor JRod. In this episode, we're going to talk about the iPhone, the device that rewired the world. Let's tap in. All right, welcome to Technology Tap. I'm Professor JRod. For those who don't know me, I'm a professor of cybersecurity, and I love helping my students pass the A+, Network Plus, and Security Plus exams from CompTIA. I also like to throw in a little bit of history every now and then, the history of modern technology. And I wrote a book called Scam Proof for Seniors, and every now and then I'll throw in a chapter. I'll do a chapter of my book. So if you want to get in contact with me, you can email me at ProfessorJRod@gmail.com. You can follow me on TikTok at ProfessorJRod, on Instagram at ProfessorJRod, on YouTube at Technology Tap Podcast. And that's it. I think the Facebook at Technology Tap Podcast. All right, so welcome back. Today we're not talking about a phone. We're talking about the moment computing left the desk, left the laptop, left the office, and entered your pocket. We're talking about the invention of the iPhone. Not just the product, not just the keynote, not just Steve Jobs holding up a rectangle glass in January 2007. We're talking about the convergence of microprocessors, miniaturization, captive touch science, battery chemistry, wireless network, software ecosystem, industrial design, and human psychology. Because the iPhone was not an isolated invention. It was a collision. A collision of decades of innovation that finally compressed into a single object. And here's the deeper question we'll wrestle over the next couple of minutes. Did the iPhone change technology, or did it change us? Let's go back before the touch screen, before apps, before swiping, before Face ID, before your bank lived in your pocket. Let's go back to the world before 2007. Before the iPhone, smartphones existed, but they weren't designed for everyone. They were tools, business tools, enterprise tools, devices with buttons, lots of buttons. And let's talk about the major players. BlackBerry. BlackBerry dominated the enterprise communication. If you were a lawyer, executive, politician, or Wall Street trader in the early 2000s, you likely carried one. Why? Push email. Push email meant your inbox updated automatically without refreshing. This was revolutionary. But here's what's interesting. BlackBerry optimized for typing efficiency, not media consumption. Its design philosophy centered around physical keyboard precision, secure enterprise email, battery longevity, and corporate IT control. Security was strong on the BlackBerry. It was super strong. User experience, functional. BlackBerry assumed phones were communication tools. Apple would later assume phones were live interfaces. That distinction matters. Nokia. Nokia was the world's largest mobile phone manufacturer. Durable, reliable, nearly indestructible. The Nokia 3310 became legendary for surviving drops that would destroy modern smartphones. But Nokia's dominance came from hardware excellence. The company underestimated software as a platform. And that would prove fatal. Palm. Palm Trio merged PDA functionality with phone capability. It had stylus input, calendar syncing, contact databases, and early web browsing. Palm's design assumed precision input via stylus. Apple will later eliminate the stylus entirely. When Steve Jobs says, "Who wants a stylus?" it wasn't just a design comment. It was a psychological shift. In the early 2000s, mobile carriers controlled everything. They approved software, controlled updates, installed bloatware, and dictated users' interface limitations. You didn't update your phone. Your carrier decided when you could. That's a radical different power structure than today. Apple would invert that relationship, and carriers will lose control. Every major technological shift begins with a wrong assumption. The assumption before 2007 was phones were communication devices. Apple asked, what if a phone is a computer? That shift, that mental reframe, is the beginning of everything. Now let's talk about something critical. The iPhone was born out of fear. In the early 2000s, Apple had a hit product, the iPod. Music lived in your pocket. Apple dominated digital music with hardware, iTunes software, and music listening deals. But Steve Jobs saw something coming. Phones were adding music playback. If phones can play MP3s, the iPod would die. Now, here's the key strategic decision. Instead of protecting the iPod, Apple chose to kill it. This is one of the most important strategic lessons in tech history. The companies that survive disruptions are the ones willing to disrupt themselves. Let's name the leader behind the decision, Steve Jobs. Jobs understood platform convergence. He saw the camera plus the phone. He saw internet plus phone, music plus phone, GPS plus phone. He realized the phone will become the convergence device. So Apple began a secret project, and this is where the real story begins. Inside Apple headquarters, a hidden project formed, codenamed Project Purple. Engineers were moved into secure areas, badge-restricted floors, limited internal communications. Even Apple employees didn't know what was being built. Why such secrecy? Because Apple wasn't just designing a better phone. They were redesigning human interaction with glass. The breakthrough was Captive multi-touch. Let's define that clearly. Touchscreens detect electronic properties in your fingers. When your skin touches the glass, it disrupts the electronic field. The change is interpreted as input. Previous phones used resistive touchscreens. Resistive screens require pressure, often with a stylus. What Apple screens allowed was pinch to zoom, swiping, flickering, multi-finger gestures. This made the interface feel alive, responsive, fluid. That emotional shift from pressing buttons to gliding on glass changed behavior. Here's something many people don't realize. The iPhone wasn't originally a phone-first project. Apple initially explored building a tablet, a large multi-touch display device. But Jobs realized, we can shrink this. We can put this in your pocket. So the tablet's research became the foundation for the phone. Years later, iPad would emerge from the same lineage. Think about what had to happen simultaneously. A desktop-class operating system scaled down. Battery technology optimized. Wireless radios miniaturized. Touchscreens integrated into glass. A new UI paradigm designed. Storage solid-state optimized. And heat management solved. This wasn't an iteration. This was system-level reinvention. Apple wasn't competing with Nokia. They were redefining the category. Apple had two options when they started doing the iPhone. Build a simplified phone OS or adapt Mac OS into something smaller. They chose option number 2, which meant the iPhone had a real browser, real internet rendering, and desktop-class architecture. When Steve Jobs later says, "This is not a baby internet," he meant it. This iPhone could load websites. That was revolutionary. We were just getting started. January 9th, 2007, Macworld Conference and Expo, San Francisco. On stage walks Steve Jobs. Black turtleneck, blue jeans, minimalist stage. He begins slowly, measures. He says, "Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything." He references the Macintosh, the iPod. And then he says, "Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone." And here's the brilliance. He doesn't introduce one product. He introduces three. A widescreen iPod with touchscreens, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communicator. He repeats it again and again. The audience claps, thinking they were separate devices. Then he reveals they are not three separate devices. This is one device. And on the screen appears an iPhone. The crowd erupts, but let's slow down. Because what made that moment historic wasn't hype. It was interface. Before this moment, phones were hardware first. The keyboard defined the experience. The navigational buttons defined the experience. The manufacturers defined the constraint. Apple removed the keyboard. That decision was radical. Why? Because physical keyboards created permanent limitations. Software keyboards are adaptive. When you remove the hardware buttons, the interface becomes dynamic. And that's true. I resisted getting an iPhone for so many years because of the keyboard. I did not want an on-screen keyboard. I wanted a regular keyboard. I was used to a keyboard on a beeper, for God's sakes. That means button can change by app, screen layout can reconfigure, language can change instantly, and accessibility improves. This was not cosmetic. This was computational freedom. When Jobs opened Safari and loaded a full desktop website, the industry underestimated what they meant. Let's define something important. Before the iPhone, most phones loaded mobile versions of websites. Stripped down, text-heavy, simplified. The iPhone rendered full HTML pages. That required real web engine support, advanced memory management, GPU-assisted rendering, and touch-based zoom logic. It wasn't perfect, but it signaled something profound. The phone was no longer a secondary device. It was a primary computing node. Executives from competitors dismissed it. Microsoft CEO at the time reportedly laughed at the price point. BlackBerry leadership questioned typing efficiency. The assumption was customers will never abandon physical keyboards. History teaches a brutal lesson. Customers abandon familiar interfaces when a superior experience appears. I'm telling you, that was the hardest thing for me. That was the big barrier for me to change from an iPhone to an iPhone, was the keyboard, an on-screen keyboard. Apple launched first, but Apple did not remain alone. Google acquired Android in 2005. Originally, Android prototypes resembled BlackBerry devices, keyboard heavy, trackball navigation. After seeing the iPhone demo, Google pivoted hard. Android redesigned around touch. The modern smartphone ecosystem was born in that pivot. Two philosophical models emerged. Apple, virtual integration, closed ecosystem, hardware plus software control. Android, open licensing, manufacturer flexibility, and broad hardware diversity. That split will define the next 15 years of mobile competition. When the original iPhone launched, there was no App Store. Let that sink in. No Instagram, no Uber, no third-party ecosystem. Apple initially believed web apps would suffice. Developers disagreed. So in 2008, Apple launched the App Store. And this is where the iPhone stopped being a product and became a platform. A platform is not just hardware. It's an ecosystem enabling third-party value creation. The App Store created revenue sharing, developers SDKs, distribution control, payment integration, and security review pipelines. Apple took a 30% commission. That decision became controversial later, but strategically, it funded ecosystem growth and ensured quality control. Entire industries were born: ride-sharing, mobile-first banking, influencer marketing, on-demand food delivery, subscriber app models. This wasn't just innovation, it was an economic restructuring. The gig economy is inseparable from smartphones. The iPhone's true power was not hardware innovation. It was a revenue model reinvention. Apple turned hardware into a platform into ecosystem, and ecosystem to recurring revenue. That's modern tech capitalism. Now let's shift into cybersecurity. The iPhone's architecture introduced several security concepts that were not standard in customers' devices at that time. Let's define them clearly. Sandboxing. Sandboxing isolates applications so they cannot access each other's data without permission. On desktop systems in the early 2000s, programs often had broad system access. On iOS systems, apps were restricted. This reduced malware propagation. Code signing. Code signing ensures software is cryptographically verified before execution. This prevents unauthorized software installation, tampered binaries, unsigned applications. This is foundational in mobile security today. Control updates. Apple controlled OS updates directly. Carriers cannot indefinitely delay patches. Security updates became standardized. From a security plus perspective, this is normalized. Patch management, device lifecycle control, and centralized update models. The iPhone made cybersecurity customer visible. Now let's go deeper. The iPhone didn't just change business, it changed attention spans, photography habits, news consumptions, dating culture, political organization, protesting coordination, childhood development, and mental health research. The camera became constant. Moments became documented. Social validation became quantified. Notification systems gamified attention. Push notification rewired dopamine cycles. This device became an alarm clock, a wallet, a map, camera, TV, computer, ID, health tracker, all in one, and always with you. Pre-iPhone, you left the internet. Post-iPhone, the internet never leaves you. And when we still studying its we are still studying its long-term impact. Let's talk about something uncomfortable. Innovation creates casualties. When the iPhone launched, it did not immediately dominate it. In fact, in 2007 and even 2008, many analysts believe it was a niche. Expensive, limited, missing enterprise features, but disruption rarely looks dominant in year one. It looks curious. BlackBerry believed physical keyboards were essential for productivity. They believed enterprise IT departments, not customers, were the primary decision makers. They believed security first meant email first. What they underestimated, the iPhone shift purchasing power from enterprise IT to individual consumers. Employees began bringing iPhones to work. This created a new IT phrase, BYOD, bring your own device. Corporate networks were no longer closed ecosystems. Employees demanded mobile access on their terms. BlackBerry was optimized for centralized control. Apple optimized it for user experience. Customers chose experience. BlackBerry market shares collapsed within 5 years. Nokia has dominated global hardware manufacturing, but Nokia's software platform, Symbian, was fragmented and difficult for developers. The iPhone proved something decisive. In the smartphone era, the software ecosystem is better than hardware durability. Nokia tried to pivot. they partnered with Microsoft. It was too late. The center of gravity had shifted. Phones were no longer appliances. They were computing platforms. Now we move on to something technical and crucial. The iPhone wasn't an interface revolution. It was a silicon revolution. Let's define silicon in this context. Silicon refers to the semiconductor chips that powered computing devices. Early iPhones relied on third-party chip designs, but Apple made a strategic decision that changed everything: design its own processors. In 2010, Apple introduced its first custom-designed system-on-a-chip, the A4. Let's define SoC, or system-on-a-chip. A SoC integrates CPU, GPU, memory controllers, security components, and neural processing units, all on a single chip. This improves power efficiency, thermal control, performance optimization, and battery longevity. Apple's vertical integration deepened. They no longer rely purely on third-party chip makers for the architecture design. They optimize hardware and software together. This is virtual integration at the silicon level. When a company controls hardware design, operating system, and processor architecture, it can optimize performance in ways competitors cannot. Apple began outperforming competitors not just in design, but in computational efficiency. The model later extended to secure in-cloud chips, neural engines for AI, and M-series processors in Macs. The iPhone became Apple's testing ground for custom silicon dominance. This is where we connect to modern cybersecurity and AI. The neural engine in modern iPhone handles face recognition, on-device machine learning, and secure biometric matching. Security became embedded in silicon, not just software. That's a paradigm shift. Let's talk authentication. Before smartphones, passwords were primary. Typing complex password on a small keyboard was inconvenient. So users just reuse simple passwords, which I tell my students not to use. Security risk increased. Apple introduced Touch ID in 2013, fingerprint authentication, then later introduced Face ID in 2017. Facial recognition used deep mapping infrared sensors. Let's define depth mapping. Unlike a simple photo-based recognition, Face ID uses infrared dot projection, 3D facial mapping, secure enclave comparison, and an encrypted biometric storage. Your biometric data never leaves the device. It is stored in a hardware-isolated enclave. This is a security-first architecture. Biometrics normalize multi-factor authentication, encrypted local identity. Customers comfort with cryptographic security. The average customer begins using cryptographic system daily without knowing it. Let's zoom out. The iPhone is not just a device. It's a global logistic machine. Manufacture requires rare earth metals, advanced semiconductor fabrication, display engineering, battery assembly, precision machining, and global shipping coordination. Apple's supply chain partnership, especially in Asia, enabled massive production scale, rapid alliteration, and global distribution. They also introduced geopolitical complexity. Semiconductor fabrication became strategically critical. Supply chain disruptions can affect entire economies. The iPhone became a geopolitical statement. Now we're moving to something heavier. The smartphone created unprecedented data collection. Location data, browsing behavior, app usage metrics, search patterns, social graph mapping. The term surveillance capitalism describes a model where user data becomes monetized behavioral protection or prediction. Let's try that again. The term surveillance capitalism describes a model where user data becomes monetized behavioral prediction. While Apple positioned itself as privacy forward, the broader smartphone ecosystem enabled target advertising, algorithmic content feeds, behavior tracking, and data brokerage. The smartphone is the most powerful sensor platform in human history and is voluntarily carried by billions. Let's define another term, attention economy. The attention economy monetizes human focus. Push notifications, endless scrolls, infinite feed refresh. App designers began optimizing engagement metrics, session duration, and retention loops. The touchscreen became a slot machine. Swipe down and refresh, variable reward systems, behavioral psychology merged with software design. The iPhone didn't invent dopamine, but it industrialized its capture. Technology is never neutral. It amplifies incentives. It platforms monetizes attention. They were engineered for addiction. If platform monetize privacy, they will minimize data collection. Design reflects revenue models, and the iPhone accelerated this dynamic globally. Before smartphones, internet access required desktop computers, fixed broadband, or physical presence. After iPhones, billions access the internet primarily through mobile. In many regions, the smartphone was the first computing device. This changed education access, financial inclusions, political mobilization, and crisis communications. During protests, revolutions, and disasters, the smartphones became the frontline tool. It democratized publishing. Anyone could live stream. Anyone could report. Gatekeeping collapsed. There's a moment in every technological revolution where growth slows, not because the technology failed, but because it's saturated. By the mid-2010s, smartphones were everywhere. Billions of devices globally. High-speed LTE networks. App ecosystem fully matured. Cameras revolving DSLRs, biometric normalized. The annual iPhone keynote shifted tone. Early years, revolution. Later years, refinement. Better camera, faster chip, longer battery, improved displays. Important upgrades, but no longer category defining, which raises a serious question. Has the smartphone reached its plateau? The first iPhone eliminated the keyboard. That was shocking. The App Store created a mobile economy. That was transformative. Touch ID normalized biometrics. That was foundational. But adding slightly thinner bezels, slightly brighter screens, and slightly faster processors doesn't really change behavior. The behavior revolution already happened, and now we're in optimization mode. Artificial intelligence did not begin with ChatGPT, but AI became customer visible through smartphones long before generated AI headlines. Let's define artificial intelligence clearly. Artificial intelligence refers to the computational systems that perform tasks typically requiring human cognition, including pattern recognitions, predictions, classifications, and language understanding. Your smartphone already uses AI for facial recognitions, predictive typing, voice assistance, photo categorization, fraud detection, and navigational routing. The modern iPhone includes neural engines inside its silicon architecture. This means machine learning models can run locally. Why does it matter? Because local AI preserves privacy. Instead of sending raw data into cloud servers, some processing happens directly on the device. This is computational decentralization. Voice assistants were early experiments. You speak, the system interprets, a command executes. But early versions struggle with context and complex dialogue. The smartphone was not yet intelligent. It was reactive. Generative AI changes that equation. The next smartphone evolution may not be hardware-based. It might be The next smartphone evolution may not be hardware-based. The next smartphone evolution may not be hardware-based. It may be cognition-based. What replaces the smartphone? Let's explore serious candidates. Augmented reality. Instead of looking down at glass, what if information overlays reality? AR glasses aim to project digital data into the physical space, remove handheld interaction, integrate navigational visually, and enable immersive computing. But AR faces challenges. Battery constraints, display minimization, social acceptance, and privacy concerns. The smartphone succeeded because it was socially acceptable. Will people wear visible computing devices constantly? That's unclear. Wearables and ambient computing. Ambient computing refers to the technology that exists in the environment, not as a focal object. Smartwatches, voice-enabled home devices, invisible sensors. Instead of one dominant device, we may move into distributed computing ecosystems. Your identity moves with you, not on your phones. Brain-computer interfaces, still experimental, but researchers are exploring direct neural interactions with computing systems. If input becomes cognitive rather than tactile, the touchscreen era ends. With dominance comes scrutiny. Governments worldwide began examining app store fees, market monopolization, data privacy practice, and encryption policies. The smartphone is no longer just a customer device. It is infrastructure, and infrastructure invites regulation. Encryption debates intensifies. Should governments have backdoor access? Apple's stance emphasizes user privacy. This positioned the company uniquely in global politics. The iPhone has become a symbol in the privacy battles. Now we move on into something personal. Smartphones has brought unprecedented access, but also anxiety amplification, sleep disruption, social comparison loops, and digital dependency. Screen time dashboards have emerged. Digital detox movements formed. Parents question device exposure. Designers reconsidered notification architecture. We are now in a reflective phase of the smartphone era. First excitement, then integration, then evaluation. Let's return to the central question. Was the iPhone an invention or a convergence? It combined decades of semiconductor research, human-computer interaction theory, network expansion, design minimization, platform economics. But what made it historic was timing. The world was ready. 3G networks expanding, battery technology maturing, customers digital literate, wireless infrastructure globalizing. The iPhone arrived at that inflection point, and it didn't just change technology, it changed posture. Look around any public space, heads tilted down, glass illuminated, connection constant. The internet is no longer a destination. It is a layer of reality. The adventures of the iPhone marked the moment computing became intimate, personal, persistent, predictive. It reshaped business models, security standards, social norms, geopolitics, attention, economies, human cognition. But here's the final thought. The iPhone did not create human behavior. It amplified it. The next revolution would not just ask, what can this device do? It would ask, what should it do? And this is where history becomes guidance, because understanding how the iPhone was built helps us understand how to build what comes next. This has been Technology Tap, and I'm Professor JRod. And remember, before AI assistants, before neural engines, there was a rectangle of glass. And when we chose to touch it, the world changed. This has been a presentation of Little Chacha Productions, art by Sarah, music by Joe Kim. We're now part of the Pod Match Network. And you can follow me at TikTok at ProfessorJRod, that's JROD, or you can email me at ProfessorJRod, JROD, at gmail.com.